Hello, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? Teresa
Yes.
opened up the queue. Let's see what we got going here. Teresa, do you have a question? Do you know how to use the chat function? Teresa, did you have a question? Hi, Sylvia. We'll give it a few minutes and let people get registered or get entered in. Hi, Ellie. How are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Doing well. Excited to do a crash course on Restoration 101. It's going to be a lot of information in an hour. And we have some spin-offs that will come off of this where we can get more in depth into certain topics that people are interested in. So we will give it a few minutes. Let's see here. Looks like somebody put something in the chat. If everybody knows how to use the chat feature, on the bottom menu bar, there's a pop-up box. We will be using the chat for questions. Also, we will have some trivia. So that way it's not just all about restoration and dry and boring. Hopefully this will be fun as well. We will have this recorded as well. So if there's people that, board members or clients or people in your office that you think could benefit from it, we will also have it recorded as well, and you'll get a copy of it. We will give it a few more minutes before we kick off. Hope everybody's staying cool out there. It's been nice. June gloom has not been too gloomy, which is unusual. All right, we're going to give it a few more minutes. Yes, Elliot. I don't know. It seems like it's been pretty sunny though. Sometimes it feels like hopefully we'll have a sunny July 4th. I mean, there's years where July 4th is cold and gloomy. So hopefully that's not the case this year.
True.
Okay, we'll give it one more minute and then we are going to kick off Restoration 101. The good, the bad, and the ugly of water, mold, and fire cleanup. Again, if you do not know how to use the chat function, definitely want to use the chat feature. We will have some trivia and we'll open up for Q&A. Hopefully be able to address everybody's questions. If not, we'll connect with you privately about the questions that you have. All right, we are going to kick it off. Welcome to Restoration 101. My name is Christian Robsek. I'm owner and founder of Service First Restoration. Today, we're going to have a crash course on water, mold, and fire cleanup, and really the good, the bad, and the ugly, and give you a very quick 1 hour crash course on what you need to know, just enough so you're dangerous. We will have some spin-off webinars that will go into deeper depths into different aspects of what we're covering today. And make sure you have access to the chat function so you can get your questions in, okay? So we're going to kick it off, actually. If you do have questions, write them into the chat. But what we're going to start off first with is fun fact number 1. Okay, so you have your chat function up. Okay, so how many homes filed a property damage claim due to water damage between 2017 and 2021? Is it A, 1 in 7, B, 1 in 60, C, 1 in 217, or D, 1 in 2,376? And you have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to get your answer in. The answer is B. It's actually 1 in 60. Congratulations. Looks like Ellie got it. Looks like Teresa won. Yeah, 1 in 60 homes actually experienced filing a claim due to water damage between 2017 and 2021. So you guys won Starbucks gift card. So congratulations. All right. Okay, let's do crash course on water damage. Okay. We're going to talk about what are the steps of the water damage process. Step number 1 is to get out and evaluate the project, the loss, but also to do extraction. If there's standing water, you want to make sure you get that water out as quickly as possible. So when you go out and do the evaluation, if there is standing water, you do want to extract that standing water. That evaluation is going to include utilizing moisture meters, which are going to tell the moisture content of the building materials, such as drywall, wood studs, flooring, cabinets, stuff like that. You're going to take a lot of times you also utilize an infrared camera. Infrared camera is a tool that measures heat differential. So it's something you can actually point up at a ceiling. Looks like the ceiling's wet. You point it up at the ceiling, it actually will show heat differential in what is cold versus warm. When something is wet, it's actually cold, so it shows up on the camera as being cold. Just admit somebody in here real quick. As part of that evaluation process, you're also going to sketch out the property. Okay, and so when you sketch out the property, you're going to take measurements of all the walls, all the window openings, cabinets, and you're going to get a detailed sketch that will include square footage and cubic footage of the affected rooms. If we have authorization to start work, the next step in the process is going to be to build a containment and set up equipment. Okay, now there's 2 types of containments. There's containments that are for asbestos and lead, where you are setting up a containment under negative air pressure. But there's also containments which are going to be utilized to minimize the drying area. And also there's going to be containments just to control dust. Anybody that has a construction project or been through a construction project knows that even if you try to minimize dust, there still is going to be dust. So sometimes property owners think that when you set up these dust barriers, that there's going to be no dust in other parts of the house. And that's just not realistic when you're dealing with a construction site. Now, the reason why you would set up a dust barrier or containment to minimize the drying area is because when you go through the drying process, that drying process is using equipment, which would be an air mover, would be an example of a piece of equipment. That air mover is going to be putting air over the building material. It's going to take that liquid that's in the building material. Let's say you have a piece of drywall that's wet. It's going to be taking that air over that building material, is actually going to cause that liquid to evaporate and turn into a vapor. And so what you want to do is you want to minimize the drying area, because you're going to utilize dehumidifiers to take the moisture out of the air. After you put the air over the building material, it turns to a vapor, and it goes into the air. And so you want your equipment to be as efficient as possible. Your dehumidifiers are taking moisture out of the air, and you want that moisture to come out of the air in the affected area. So for example, if you got a huge, California living room, kitchen area, the dehumidifier, although it's working, it's less effective if it's bringing air in from the kitchen and you're working in the family room, for example. Before you do any demolition, you do need to do environmental testing. I know that we actually have some people from out of state on this meeting. California, we'll get into the asbestos and lead laws, but California leads everything environmental, right? Leads all trends. Before you remove any material that could potentially have asbestos in it, such as drywall, certain types of flooring, certain types of roofing, mud, certain types of pipes that could be wrapped with asbestos, you need to have those materials tested before you remove them. As soon as you get clearance that you do not have any asbestos or lead in the property, that's when you can begin demolition. The demolition is you really want to do under a containment, just to try to minimize dust. Even if you do not have lead or asbestos at the property, still want to minimize the dust. So that's why another reason for utilizing those containments. When you start demolition, you want to, the objective is to remove the building materials that you're not going to be able to dry in place. If you start a project quickly enough, there are certain materials such as drywall and even certain circumstances, insulation and flooring and cabinets, that you can actually dry in place if it's a fresh water damage that just happened recently. After you've done all of the demolition, you are going to monitor that project and adjust the equipment. And you're going to monitor that project, depending on the project, every day to every couple days, depending on circumstances. Okay. And you'll monitor that project. You might add a piece of equipment. You might move a piece of equipment. You might remove a piece of equipment after one section of the property is actually dry. That is the quick and dirty about water damage restoration. We're on to fun fact number 2. Okay. Fun fact number 2. Fun fact number 2 is, how quickly can mold start growing? Okay, put the answer into the chat. You've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we are done. And the answer is D, 24 hours. Let's see who got it. Who got D? Did anybody get D here? Sylvia got D. Congratulations. Mold can actually start growing within 24 hours. And it's not that you necessarily see the mold growth, but the environment for that mold to start growing has taken place, right? So you might not visually see black, dusty stuff on the drywall, but that environment has been conducive to growing mold. And so that process actually can start within 24 hours. Okay, so let's just say, for example, we're sent out on a water damage, but we get out there and we determine that, you know what, it's not a water damage. Maybe we took off some baseboards, or maybe we did some inspection. We drilled a little hole into the drywall and we saw mold inside on the studs. You know what, this is not a water damage. Maybe there's somebody that is elderly or sick. Maybe there's a legal situation going on. We want to treat this as a mold remediation, right? So first off, just because you see some mold doesn't always warrant a mold remediation, okay? We actually go into some properties where people have more mold in their showers than they do where the water damage is located. So just because you see mold doesn't mean that it's necessarily a mold remediation. And that actually can, it's not black or white. right? So as part of our process, part of our intake process, but also part of the process when you inspect the property and you are asking questions, who lives there? Is there anybody sick? Is there any children, any elderly? You're going to evaluate the situation and determine whether mold remediation is needed and warranted. So let's assume a mold remediation is needed and warranted. Some questions we get is, do you need to pre-test for mold, right? Somebody sees some mold, do you need to pre-test? There's very few circumstances that require pre-testing for mold if you visually see mold. So for example, there's a leak in the sink, and underneath the sink, you see black stuff all in the cabinets, all on the drywall. You pop off the toe kick to the cabinet, there's mold all underneath there. Do we need to do a pre-test? We would say no, it's not required. Why waste the money of the client to test something that we already know is, we'll call it suspicious growth. We're not technically supposed to call it mold, because we don't have enough letters behind our names to say that. It hasn't really been tested, but that's growth that should not be there. So in that circumstance, we would not recommend doing a pretest. So when is a pretest justifiable? Right? We actually just had this call yesterday. We had it's HOA board president. The board president's wife has been, said that she's been feeling sick. There was some work being done exterior on a balcony. The person that was doing the work on the balcony said that they believed they saw some mold growth on the outside. We went in, we did an inspection. Nothing was wet. There was no sign of anything being wet. There's no visual sign of any mold growth. So from the interior of the property, and when we looked at the outside, we didn't see anything that warranted a mold remediation. Well, but the person's feeling sick. So that would be a situation where you might want to do a pretest, where we'd recommend a pretest is to go in, take air samples in that room that they believe it might be located, in other rooms in the property, then also outside, to determine, are the levels of mold spore count elevated inside the property, right? There's mold everywhere. If you have, soil outside your property and it's mulch and right, if you got a compost outside your kitchen, you're going to have different mold spores outside your kitchen than somebody that does not. Those mold spores that are coming from that compost are going to be entering the property. It doesn't mean that it's a dangerous level per se, right? It's just something that is to know that each environment's different. There is mold in every single environment. So not often do we get the calls where people are sick and you can't find it. But if you can't find something that might be a cause of mold that warrants further investigation, a pretest might be warranted. Now, we get in, we see that kitchen, there's mold underneath. First thing you got to do is you got to contain the area, right? So you got to move out any of the personal belongings from the drawers, etc. You got to contain off. Well, take a step back. You might not do removal if it's affecting or disturbing the material, right, that you're going to be removing, right? So you don't want the mold to go airborne, okay? You don't want it to go airborne before you do the containment. So you put the containment up. You have your kitchen cabinets, you have your countertops. You're going to physically remove the mold, right? So the countertops, obviously we want to try to save those countertops. Countertops can be expensive. And last thing we want to do is replace countertops in this part of the kitchen that also are in that part of the kitchen and also over in that part of the house, right? That gets very costly. But so you want to attempt to try to save those. Even when you do try to save them, you stilt them up and you support them. They still can crack, and there's no guarantee. They're put in place not to be removed, right? So you have your cabinet, your countertop supported up. You remove the cabinets. You now have access to the wall. When you remove those cabinets, you're going to bag that up with double 6 mil plastic. You're going to make sure that when you remove those trash bags, that you're not contaminating the other parts of the property. One way that you make sure you're not contaminating other parts of the property is you have that containment under negative air pressure, meaning you have an air scrubber. It's a HEPA filter. It reduces the particulates down to 0.3 microns. And when you open up the zipper to the containment, there's actually a draft of air going inwards, right? It's not allowing that air to come out, right? And so you have that containment of negative air pressure. You bag up, you get rid of the cabinets. Now you get rid of the drywall that's in the back. And now you're dealing with the studs, right? You do not cut out the studs. What you actually do is you physically, with manual labor, remove the mold from the studs. The process of removing the mold is going to include wire brushing, sanding, HEPA vacuuming, utilizing an antimicrobial, and there's some other things that you could do as well. But that would be your core activities that you're going to do in a mold remediation. The reason why mold remediations can be super expensive is because that's all labor intensive, right? On the water damage, if you start the project quickly enough, you can utilize equipment to minimize the demolition, which minimizes the labor, which minimizes the overall repair costs, right? With mold, you've got to physically remove it. You got to use your brawn. You got to get in there and you got to physically bag it up, remove it, sand it, HEPA vacuum it, wet wipe it, and go through that process. So a mold remediation, if you take a water restoration project. Now, a stat that came out a couple of years ago was the national average for water damage restoration timeline was 4.2 days. But because we are in the state of California and because of the environmental regulations that we follow with the asbestos testing, et cetera, that we're a little bit longer than that in California than 4.2 days. But if you add a mold remediation to that, you're going to add a couple days to the water damage project, right? So in a water damage, let's just say you did need to remove the cabinets, right? You did need to support up the countertops. Great. Well, now you got to do the physical cleaning of the studs. So that adds time to the project, right? But when you're done, if we're calling it a mold remediation, you're actually going to be doing post-clearance testing. Right. And so that post-clearance testing, we've removed all the material, we've HEPA vacuumed, we've wire brushed it, we've sanded it, we've HEPA vacuumed it, we wet wiped it. We've now set it up for clearance testing. We're going to run that air scrubber for at least 24 hours before the testing company comes in to take the test. Okay. So that process can add several days to the overall water damage process. Okay. All right, so moving on, or before we go past this, on the mold remediation, how do you get sick from mold? You inhale it, right? So you're keeping mold spores count down. You're doing the containment under negative air pressure. You do not want to inhale those mold spores. All right, so we are on to fun fact number 3. Okay, so fun fact number 3. How does someone get sick from lead-based paint? How does somebody get sick from lead-based paint? And I'm going to give you 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is digestion, B. Right? So how do you get sick from lead-based paint? Well, lead-based paint, lead-based, I apologize. It sounded like somebody was trying to bear with me. Let me get back to it. Okay, lead-based paint. Forgive me with that. So actually, people get sick from lead-based paint. Who is most susceptible to getting sick from lead-based paint? Well, let's talk about where lead-based paint was utilized most often and frequently, right? Lead-based paint is a great paint product. It's super durable, right? Adding that lead component to the paint makes it super durable. So where would they want to use super durable paint, right? Super durable paint is utilized in kitchens, in bathrooms, around windowsills, places where there's, door frames and doors, right? Because it's super durable. So why wouldn't you want to use it in those places? Well, here's what happens, right? Does anybody remember, you don't see them in new homes anymore, but anybody remember the windows where you had to lift up and it had the ropes on the side and had the metal latch on top of the window, right? They're super heavy. Right? You slam it down. What happens to that lead-based paint? It chips, right? you slam the door, you're in the kitchen, something happens. What happens to that lead-based paint? It chips. Where do those chips go? Those chips go onto the floor, right? Those chips go onto the floor. Then they get broken up and they turn into particulates, dust and stuff, right? So who's on the floor? Who's on their hands and knees? Often children, right? So hand to mouth. Actually, children. There's a. I apologize. I wish I looked this up because I just forgot it. But children have had one of the highest percentages of lead-based paint poisoning. And so it's because they're hand to mouth. They're crawling on the floor and they're putting their hands in their mouth and they have the lead on their hands. Hands are wet. They touch the lead, then it goes in their mouth. So children are actually most susceptible to lead-based paint. And symptoms of lead paint poisoning is actually can just be like a flu symptom. At times, right? But it can also be very severe and cause brain and blood disorders and stuff like that. But more often than not, it's people actually feel like they've had the flu and they might just think that they got sick, right? So testing for lead. Okay, the beautiful thing about testing for lead is that there is a clear cutoff. Okay, 1978 or older properties need to be tested for lead. There is a clear cutoff. There's no question, right? There's no uncertainty, right? You do not have different governing bodies with their stuff that's been floating around the internet that's contradictory to each other. Lead-based paint needs to be tested in properties 1978 or older. Now, when you find a property that is hot for lead-based paint, it does add a couple days to your typical water damage or mold remediation because there are certain protocols that need to take place that are more in depth than your typical mold containment. You actually have to do a containment that starts on the floor and goes up the walls. It's more intense. And so it does add time to your typical water damage or mold remediation project. To close it with lead-based paint, the best part about it is it's 1978 or older. If you're trying to explain it to a client, if they go to look it up online, there's not contradictory information out there. All right, so we are on to fun fact number 4. Okay, so fun fact number 4. Fun fact number 4. Okay. What rule was established in 2019 by AQMD that now requires asbestos testing for all renovation and demolition activities? Write your answer into the chat. You've got 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All right. Okay, so I see a lot of right answers on that. That means you guys are educated, okay? So that's really good. The answer is Rule 1403, A, 1403, okay? Rule 1403, and it actually isn't a new rule, it's just clarification in the rule because the rule originally was written almost like an attorney. If you're in the HOA industry and you read CC&R and you read the whole paragraph and you're like, what did that just say? Right? I know everybody's had that experience reading a legal document. So let's talk about asbestos testing, right? We all like lead because it's 1978 and older, but there's been so much misinformation about asbestos testing. And that's because you can find different information online. The Contractor State License Board in California, I haven't checked recently, but it used to say 1980 you need to test for asbestos, right? The EPA has their standard, which is the rule 1403 AQMD. You have, if you're in the insurance world, you have insurance departments that are outside of the state of California that do not follow the EPA guidelines. They follow their carrier guidelines, right? So up until 2019, if we were going through an insurance claim, you might test a property in 1986, 1987, 1983. It was all over the place with the different carriers. In 2019, when AQMD came out with the modifications to Rule 1403, and if you're interested, we can send you a copy of a document, written out document with screenshots, etc. that really, if you're trying to explain this to a customer, it's a step-by-step walkthrough on what the rules are and guidelines are. Just put it in the chat. If you're interested in that, we can get that to you. Okay. But Rule 1403 basically states any year, it's crystal clear now. Any year you need to test for asbestos if you're removing material that could contain asbestos, right? Drywall, mud, roofing, certain types of flooring, pipe wrap, etc. Okay. Now, this is where it gets, we love California. California is great. So we have this beautiful weather. It's sunny out. In the United States, when you get a asbestos test, asbestos containing material, or the industry might call ACM, asbestos containing material, ACM is considered 1% or greater according to the EPA. So if it has 1% or greater asbestos containing material, it is considered to be asbestos containing material and needs to be treated and removed properly. Well, California is the leader of everything. If you can see on the screen there, what is California? Well, California, we have our Cal OSHA regulations, right? Cal OSHA is for California occupational safety for our employees, right? So anything in the state of California that if you get it tested and it's above 0.1%, it actually qualifies as asbestos containing material. It needs to be treated just like anything above 1%. Now, here's the thing that'll blow your mind. If it's between 0.1% and 0.99%, we have to suit up, wear the mask, everything as if it's above 1%. But guess what we get to do? We actually get to take that trash and dump it in our trash can. You could come into my office here and you could actually take that debris and dump it in the trash can. It does not need to be disposed of as if it's a 1% or greater asbestos containing material. So how confusing is that, right? So we protect the safety of employees and occupants, etc., but we actually get to go out and throw it in the trash. So asbestos becomes dangerous when it becomes friable. Okay. Friable means that it's chipped and dust and it's cut into, right? It goes into the air. So then what happens is when it goes into the air, you actually inhale it. Everybody, like lead, children are most susceptible, right? Because they're on their hands and knees. But with asbestos, because it goes airborne, anybody in that property is susceptible to that, right? Now, some of the processes and procedures when you're removing asbestos, you're going to set up your containment. You're going to wear the proper PPE, personal protective equipment. But one of the steps that you're going to do is you're actually going to wet all the building material down. So, for example, you have drywall. You're actually going to wet the drywall down before you remove it. That way you're controlling the dust environment or lack thereof, right? You don't want that dust. And when it comes to asbestos containing material, it does add a couple days to that, to the length of the project, right? When you have to remove that asbestos. All right. So I'm going to put into the chat here. We have fun fact number 5. Okay. Fun fact number 5. Are you guys ready? Fun fact number 5 is, what is the leading cause of household fires? Is it A, power tools, B, dryer vent, C, cooking, or D, electrical? And I'm going to give you to the count of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And the answer is C, cooking. It's actually cooking fires are the number one cause of cooking is the number one cause of fires. You'd think it'd be dryer vents. I saw a lot of answers for dryer vents, right? Because that's what you hear of, right? You got to get those dryer vents cleared out to not cause a fire, but it's actually cooking. So stay safe out there cooking, right? And there's nothing worse than when you get those calls at Thanksgiving and Christmas, right? Where they've been cooking with the family and something happens. Those are the worst, especially Thanksgiving, because then that whole disaster takes them right through Christmas and just really ruins that. That's always the most unfortunate. All right, smoke and fire restoration. Okay, so let's talk smoke and fire restoration. So if you have a property that just caught on fire, okay, the first thing you have to do is secure the site, right? I can't tell you how often, if a site isn't secured, that the property's broken into. You would think sometimes we look at these properties like, why would somebody even think of breaking into these properties, right? So you got to secure it. They're going in and they're stealing things. We had a property in Irvine where the person didn't want to secure the property, right? They weren't ready to make a decision and proceed forward, et cetera, right? It's super overwhelming. They had handbags. Like the woman had a couple hundred handbags worth over $100,000. Somebody came in and actually stole all those handbags, right? They didn't want to, they were just overwhelmed with the circumstance. So number one, you got to secure it. That means you might have to put a fence up. That means you might have to board up all the windows downstairs, upstairs, padlocks, but secure the property, right? You want to make sure also nobody gets in there and gets hurt. Right? It could be some kids from the neighborhood. Hey, let's go check out that house that caught on fire. And they go in and there's a beam that's hanging and it falls, right? That means the homeowner's liable for that. The property owner's liable for that. If you're HOA, the HOA could be liable for that. So number one, secure the property. Okay. Number two, you got to perform any emergency repairs, right? That example of the beam or walls falling, right? You got to make sure you secure the property, but then perform any emergency repairs to mitigate any further damage to the property or to neighbors, right? You got to make sure that you're securing the property, make sure nobody else or nothing else at the property is getting damaged, right? While that's going on, there's what's called cause and origin. Okay, so the fire department sends out their fire trucks. They have somebody that's on staff that determines cause and origin. Right, so they send their cause and origin team in, and they deem that it was in the garage and it started. Let's say it was a cooking fire right in the kitchen. Their cause and origin isn't worried about liability, right? So anybody that's a stakeholder in that property. So, for example, insurance carrier. Let's just talk about condos for a second. You have the property owner, and then you got that has their own policy of the master policy of the HOA. You could have two insurance companies that have a vested interest on what was the cause and origin of that, right? Was it really a cooking fire, or was it the microwave had shorted out and caused a fire? So therefore, the insurance company's going to say that the microwave manufacturer is at fault, and they're going to subrogate and try to recoup some of their money. Yes, they are still responsible for making their insured whole, but guess what? They would rather not pay that whole bill if they do not have to. So the city fire department, their cause and origin team is going to get in and out super quick. But the cause and origin team for the insurance carriers, that process can take days, if not weeks, to really determine. So while that's going on, you're not going to be doing any cleanup or removal of that affected area where the cause and origin team is working. So, for example, cause took place, or the origin of it was in the kitchen. We believe it's a cooking fire, but smoke had gotten all throughout the house. It had gotten on the car in the garage. It had gotten all over everything throughout the house. So one of the steps that you want to get started as quickly as possible is actually soot removal. So if you hire the right contractor, they're going to work with the cause and origin team. They're going to deem, okay, do not do any removal or any work here in the kitchen, but let's minimize costs. And how you minimize costs in restoration, get the project started quickly. Let's get that soot off things. Soot can be acidic. Soot can erode and corrode rubbers and plastics and stuff like that. So you want to get that soot removed as quickly as possible to cause secondary damages. You can actually have a property sit for a long time and that soot sit on something that was salvageable, but then it's been sitting on there so long that it corrodes that now you have to total loss that furniture, aspects of the home. So you definitely want to get that soot removal started as quickly as possible, but you cannot work in the affected area where the origin of the property is until it's been cleared by a cause and origin team, right? So then the last step is the restoration, right? So you've secured the property, you've performed some emergency repairs so people aren't going to get hurt. You've determined cause and origin. You've done soot removal. Now it's restoration. That restoration can actually include structural removal, not just in the affected area, right? It's super easy. You walk into the kitchen and cabinets behind me had caught fire. Yes, you know that that's being removed, right? But what happens with a fire is, if this fire was in my office right now, what happens in this room? Well, it gets really hot. What happens when things are hot? They get high pressure, right? So this room becomes high pressure. That pressure has to go somewhere, right? So it's trying to equalize. And so what can actually happen is it can get so hot that pressure is actually going into and through light switch sockets, plug outlets. So you can actually be in the opposite side of the property. There could have been so much heat generated in this room that it actually will force smoke and soot inside the wall. So you can actually do wall removal throughout an entire property if it gets so hot that it actually charges that soot inside the wall, right? So you got to remove all the building material, and then you've got to put it all back together. Now that process is very elaborate, right? One thing I kind of skipped over was before you do all the removal, you're going to do a very detailed documented sketch, photos. You can use 360 cameras, almost like the realtors use when you do the tours. So you can actually see exactly what the property was, so you can actually build it back to its pre-loss condition, which is what the insurance carrier is typically bound to do per the policy, right? Okay, so that is the nitty-gritty for smoke and fire restoration. What is the most frequently asked question? The most frequently asked question when we're talking to customers is, how do we save money, right? So how do we save money? Everything we just talked about, every single type of project, water, mold, we didn't go over sewage, but sewage, smoke and fire damage. The faster you get a project started, the less building material you need to remove or dispose of, the less disturbance to the occupant if you're insurance. And that's called additional living expenses, right? Does the person need to move out? Well, if we can dry these wood floors in place, maybe they don't have to move out. We don't have to take the wood floor and pack out their entire property, right? Well, you can't salvage wood floors if you start the process in 2 weeks. You're not able to do that, right? And so you want to start the project as quickly as possible. So if you're in a position where you are coming across, where you have clients or you're representing a property or an HOA, you really need to partner with a restoration vendor. So that way you guys can build trust, establish rapport, and that way you can actually get that project started as quickly as possible. It's going to lead to less demolition, less repairs, and it's going to lower the overall project costs. So with that being said, I'd like to open it up to questions. Feel free to add questions into the chat. That was a very quick crash course, but please put questions into the chat. This video will come over, so you can feel free to share it with somebody. We will be having some more topics that are coming up via webinar. One is a behind the curtain. Like, I gave you like the high level view of restoration, but what really happens behind the scenes, right? Some people think, hey, just two guys in a truck show up. But what really happens after you send a restoration contractor a work order or a client? The next one is claims handling. How do you minimize claims? How do you minimize total claims dollars? How do you minimize your loss ratios if you're in an insurance agent? We have a webinar that's coming up on that. And hopefully everybody got some value today. It was a very quick crash course. There's way more to restoration. To summarize, if you like to live in a black and white world, restoration is not the world you want to live in, because everything is gray. It's circumstantial. You know, when we talked about mold, don't make a mountain out of a molehill. You could get into a situation where there's a speck of this much mold, and somebody is stating that they're super sick and that they've got an attorney involved. So are we going to treat this much mold as if it's a mold remediation? Our job is to mitigate risk, mitigate liability, right? And so you want to partner with somebody that understands that. Don't make a mountain out of a molehill, but also don't be reckless and put the restoration contractor, the customer, everybody involved into a potential situation of litigation. So thank you. We appreciate you. And hopefully we see you soon.